Привіт, я Євген Гоманюк, я представляю культурну спільноту платформу Маярд, і я розкажу вам про своє рідне місто Миколаїв і те, як він переживає цю війну. Нам завжди здавалося, що війна десь далеко, проте вже майже рік, як війна увійшла в дім кожного українця, принесши з собою кризу, смерть і руйнування. Наше життя змінилося. Ми навчилися виживати в нових умовах, без води, без світла і щоденними повітряними тривогами та під обстрілами російських ракет. І ми всі зрозуміли, що до війни, як це не звучало, ми всі були дуже щасливими. Взагалі Миколаїв є портовим, промисловим та логістичним центром України. В місті розташовані 6 портів, через які в країні ЄС експортували зерно та соняшникову олію. Проте зараз через війну ці порти заблоковані. Ціла морегосподарська галузь, вона стала на велику паузу. Зупинилося виробництво, закрились офіси великих компаній і припинили свою роботу іноземні торгові мережі. Як наслідок, тисячі миколаївців втратили роботу та єдині джерела для свого існування. Ну а в країнах ЄС збільшились ціни на ці продовольчі товари. Миколаїв з перших днів війни завжди був під обстрілами, тому ми всі навчилися розрізняти типи російських ракет за звуком вибуху. Внаслідок цих атак було пошкоджено до 2000 будинків, з яких 30 багатоповерхових та 70 приватних зруйновані вщент і не підлягають відновленню. Але найгірше те, що війна забирає життя людей. Від цих обстрілів в місті загинули 149 цивільних осіб, в тому числі і діти. В Миколаєві зруйновані школи, дитячі садочки, комерційні та промислові об'єкти. Росіяни знищили і понівечили 3 головні будівлі миколаївських університетів. Тому діти не ходять в дитсадки і школи, а студенти не мають можливості навчатися в вишах. Також у нас не працюють кінотеатри, а театри, які залишилися, показують вистави лише в підвалах. У нас щодня відключають по декілька разів на день світла, тому ми вечеряємо при свічках та заряджаємо телефон у магазині, де працює генератор. Взагалі ми дуже часто, ну не часто, а майже завжди сидимо ввечері вдома, тому що за вікном, як ви бачите, немає вуличного освітлення, а вночі діє комендантська година. В цих умовах ми багато чого навчилися. Навчилися готувати їжу на газовому туристичному балоні, тому що в квартирі електрична плита і духовка. Навчились збирати дощову воду та брати воду з річки для домашніх потреб, тому що через руйнування водопроводу в Миколаєві вода з крану непридатна до споживання. Багато хто з нас пішов захищати свою батьківщину, хтось вперше став волонтером, хтось навчився надавати першу медичну допомогу при пораненні. Ми всі так чи інакше перепрофілювали свою основну діяльність на допомогу країні і цивільному населенню, яке в цих умовах потребує підтримки. За цих умовах з Миколаєва евакуювалось вже понад 50% населення. Малий і середній бізнес вимушений зробити релокацію в інші більш безпечні регіони країни. І зараз миколаївці розкидані по всьому світу, і більшість, я точно знаю, з них мріють повернутися назад додому. Але ми віримо в перемогу і сподіваємося на вашу підтримку. Дуже дякую вам за увагу і на все добре.
Das war Jewgen
So
Gomeniuk.
we just heard Yevgen Homanyuk, always from Mykolaiv in the south of Ukraine, and this is how we would like to start off with our 23rd edition of the Foreign Policy Conference. I'd like to warmly welcome you. My name is Giorgio Franceschini. I am an officer for foreign and security policy in the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, and our title is Security in the Twilight Zone. This is an issue, this deals with the security in Eastern Europe, and today we will not only hear Yevgen Homonyuk, but as well voices from Moldova, from Belarus, from Armenia and Georgia. And in this session, we will provide you with the opportunity to ask your questions and to interact with us. And in order to do so, we have organized a questions and answers tool, a Q&A tool where you can ask your questions that we will try to pick up throughout the conference. We will either pick them up ourselves or pass them on to our panelists. And if you don't wish to ask any questions, maybe we can ask you some questions. We have prepared 2 little surveys, and maybe you can get your mobile phones prepared to do so. But before we talk to our co-president of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation here in Berlin, I would like to briefly say something about the security in the Twilight Zone. So what is this Twilight Zone? What do we mean by that? Over the last decade, we are observing what happened in Europe, in NATO, Europe, or OECD have talked about a security structure in Europe. We said once and again that we wanted to see that there are no different zones of different security levels. And now we have failed in this claim. There are indeed zones within Europe with different security levels, and we do have a situation that is enormously difficult, that stretches from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. A few of those countries that we have mentioned are to be located in this zone or in this area, and this is what we would like to talk about. And I'm really delighted to be able to present Jan-Philipp Albrecht, who's our co-president. He has accepted his mandate in June 2022, and I remember that in July we came together for the first time, and I've talked to you about the Foreign Policy Conference, and we were thinking about what we could include in the program and the agenda in February 2023. And then quite quickly we came up with security and foreign policy in Eastern Europe. And why was it so important for you to talk about this issue here at the Foreign Policy Conference? Thank you so much, Giorgio Franceschini, for the introduction. And from my side as well, warm welcome to this Foreign Policy Conference that without any doubt, in views of the events will take place in views of the events of the last 2 years, and with the war of aggression in Ukraine, it became quite clear and obvious that this event is something that we have to deal with quite some time. And as you rightly mentioned it, the question of the security architecture in Europe has to be levied again. And this is what we mean when we have to think not only about the events of the last year, but as well when we think about the consequences for Europe and for the whole world. And so this is what we were directed by when we wanted to place this foreign policy conference in this context and take into consideration one perspective that in the last years, in the previous time of the war, might have not gotten enough attention. This is the perspective of our Eastern European and Central European neighbors within the European Union, but as well outside the European Union, so our direct neighbors. And this is a perspective that we wanted to give some room to put our focus on it. So when we talk about this European security architecture, then of course this might get a new orientation. And this is the contribution that we wanted to make here in this foreign policy conference. Thank you so much, Jan. And so this is the region where we are present as a foundation, Central and Eastern Europe. And what is important to you as a co-president of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation? What comes to your mind when we think about Eastern Europe, Heinrich-Böll Foundation, our values, and so on? Well, first of all, I think with our stakeholders on the ground in Moldova, in Georgia, in Armenia, and many other countries of Central and Eastern Europe, we want to gather different perspectives, something that we already did, that did not receive enough attention. And then again, in Russia, we had a very intense presence and confrontation with the regime. And in the last years, as Heinrich-Böll Foundation, as undesired foundation, as we've been declared from the regime, which is like the highest penalty that makes it really difficult for us to act on the ground with our partners and stakeholders on the ground. It's really difficult for us to work there. And for those who might think of returning to Russia, and this is what we have to deal with in this year, to look intensively towards possible perspectives apart from dealing with this war that is still ongoing and still raging, and defending our values in Eastern and Central Europe. And right now, at the moment, there's not too much to be done. There's not too much light at the end of the tunnel. But if we are to consider that our longstanding partner organization, Memorial, that has done so much important work, has received the Nobel Peace Prize, then we might get this glimpse of light at the end of the tunnel, at the horizon. And then in the end, well, we have to think beyond that day and to keep an active dialogue. And this is something that we are moved by in those coming days in the debate of how we pursue this issue. Thank you so much, Jan-Philipp Albrecht, co-president of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. And you're a technic freak. So maybe you can take part in our next survey, where we'll need our mobile phones, not only you, but of course, this applies to all our listeners. But first of all, we would like to include our audience and our panelists. And as always, we have provided different opportunities for you to take part in the survey. First opportunity is to use your mobile phone, your smartphone. You see the QR code, you scan it, and then you will be redirected to the right page. The second opportunity pops up in the chat. So you can include the URL www.mente.com and then use the code 15978346. And then there is a different possibility. I now see some of you interacting already. You have cast your votes. So this is an English question that you can read here. Besides Ukraine, this is, of course, the most affected country in Eastern Europe. Which other East European country is most threatened at the moment? So the most threatened country in Eastern Europe. Now your turn to vote. 54 people have cast their votes already, and you can see a clear trend here. The Republic of Moldova, by difference, seems to be the most threatened country right now. Last week, we have heard quite troublesome declarations from the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov when it comes to the Republic of Moldova. And then what surprises me, that Armenia, that is finding itself in a very difficult situation, very difficult conflict with Azerbaijan, is the country that you have rated least threatened. 80 people have cast their votes, and I think we get quite a complex picture. Republic of Moldova is the most threatened, followed by Georgia and Belarus, the Baltic countries, and then Armenia, the least threatened, according to you. Next question. We have looked at a few external actors, and the question is, who of those stated is the most relevant actor pushing back on Russian aggression? And we have not listed all possible actors. We have not listed the United States. France did not receive any votes. Germany, at least one vote. The EU 12 already, and Poland leading the difference, 30 votes. We will give you a few more seconds, but there is a clear trend that the most relevant actor in this field seems to be Poland when it comes to pushing back the Russian aggression, followed quite closely by the EU. As an overall institution, Germany and France fall back, although Germany received a few more votes than France, but this is quite a clear picture that you provide us with. Well, we really look forward to the response of our panelists. And now we come to our last question. This is a personal question. We have people present here who live in Eastern Europe. A few are based here in Berlin. Do you personally feel threatened by the Russian aggression at the moment? This is quite interesting. We have a 50-50 outcome here. We will wait a few more seconds, but generally speaking, this is our result, knowing that the majority of the audience is based here in Germany. And this, of course, might have an influence on the outcome. So I think this gave us an idea of the questions we are to pursue this afternoon. And with that, I think it would be the right time to present our welcome speech. He is the leader of the Belarusian opposition, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. He unfortunately could not be with us because she had to speak at a different event, but she was so kind to send us a welcome message, and I really look forward to her words. I don't think that she needs any further introduction. She lives in exile right now in Lithuania, and she ran for presidency in Belarus in 2020. Her husband has been imprisoned, and now she's a leader of the opposition in exile. So I hope the technical works. I could read it out.
Dear friends, excellencies, it's a big honor to address you today on behalf of the Belarusian
Freunde, Exzellenzen,
Heinrich-Böll Foundation for organizing this conference. Let me also use this opportunity to thank you for supporting Belarusian civil society and academic community. Thanks to your foundation, many students and researchers have received scholarships. It's not an exaggeration to say we are living through a historical moment. The future of Europe is being decided right now. It's being decided on the battlefields of Ukraine, in the Belarusian underground resistance, and of course, in the European capitals. Revanchist Russia is testing our values and our unity. The question is, are we as Europeans able to defend democratic values and freedoms, or will we let tyrannies take over again? We observed it in Belarus during the last 2 years. Lack of consistency and bravery among Western politicians make dictators feel impunity. Though my political journey is pretty short, I learned 3 lessons, and I want to share them with you. Lesson number 1: tyrants cannot be appeased or educated. Any attempts to make a deal are seen by them as weakness, so democracies must show their teeth. Lesson number 2: our fight is a global one. We cannot win alone. Democracy wins when we stand together and confront tyranny no matter where it appears. If we allow dictators to terrorize their people, they will go on to threaten their neighbors and then the whole world. After crushing democratic protests, the dictator Lukashenko hijacked a plane, orchestrated a migrant crisis, and then dragged our country into Putin's bloody war. Lesson number 3: democracy is not a free gift. It must be seized by citizen engagement and active participation. After many decades of dictatorship in Belarus, many people don't even know what democracy actually is. Therefore, we must build democratic institutions from scratch using the internet and digital technologies to ensure that everyone is included. Dear friends, today my beloved Belarus is taken hostage by Putin's Russia. The situation is tough, but not hopeless. Changes in Belarus are more possible than it might seem. Despite terror and mass repressions, people still find bravery to fight. Only last year, our partisans conducted more than 80 acts of sabotage to stop Russian trains. 30,000 volunteers collect information about the movement of Russian troops. 5,000 criminal cases were opened for anti-war protests, which show the real scale of resistance. And today we fight not just for free elections, but for the very existence of our country. But we also see that only our efforts are not enough. We need international assistance and support. And I strongly believe that without free and democratic Belarus, there will not be safe Ukraine, and there will not be a safe Europe. And I believe that democratic Belarus will be the strongest sanction against Putin. It's crucial to distinguish between the Belarusian people and the regime. Belarusians stand on the side of Ukraine. They want freedom, democracy, and independence. So support those who fight on the ground and from exile, activists, volunteers, families of repressed. We need more help for media and information campaigns to counter Putin's and Lukashenko's propaganda. Support cultural initiatives and scholarships for young Belarusians. We need to shape the future elites now. It's also essential to show Belarusians the positive alternative, something to fight for. Belarusians must feel and see a European perspective. Sometimes it seems that Belarus is left for a day after, and it's not right. We should not let Putin have Belarus as a consolation prize. And finally, it's absolutely essential to include Belarus as we rethink a security structure of Europe. So make Belarus a part of this conversation. Invite Belarusian democratic forces to international forums and events so our voice is also heard. The path to freedom and peace in Europe can be long and difficult, but let's walk this path together. Живи Беларусь, and слава Украине!
Okay, I changed to English now, and we heard a message from the ground from Ukraine at the very beginning. We heard the Belarusian opposition leader, Tsikhanouskaya. And before we start our panel, I would like to hear another message from the ground, and this time from Georgia. And I kindly ask now Laura Gotiashvili from Tbilisi to switch on her camera and her microphone. Hello, Laura, good to see you.
Hello.
And Laura Gotiashvili is a school teacher. She teaches English in a small mountain place, and she lives in Tbilisi. And I would like to start, Laura, with a question about, which goes back to the poll we just had, where I asked people, are you concerned about your security in this very moment? Are you concerned about Russian aggression? If you look around in Georgia, talk to people, talk to friends, what is your impression on like the general feeling in Georgia on the streets? Are you concerned about your security, or are you relaxed and think the war is just in another country?
Thank you for interesting questions, and thank you for inviting, of course. And about general opinion in Georgia, yes, we feel concerned and we are afraid of Russian aggression. We experienced it in 2008, but therefore we want to support Ukraine and we want to show our friends our support. It is not hidden that our government did not refused to join international sanctions against Russia. And it led us to demonstrations and civil protests. Of course, we're afraid of Russia, but we want to show our support to Ukraine, and generally we have very critical situation in Georgia because Russians decided to relocate, to move to Georgia. They also moved their businesses in Tbilisi, and now Tbilisi is full of Russians, and you cannot hear Georgian language as well, because everybody speaks now in Russian. They bought apartments, flats, therefore, and prices of real estate and products also increased. And comparing to middle class of Russia, which moved to Georgia, comparing to Georgians middle class, their income is much higher. So our prices increased really, and now life became very expensive for Georgians too, and everybody has now one opinion. Russians did not occupy Georgia in 2008 during the August War, thanks to support of Western countries, but now they try to achieve goals in this way. They purchase flats in Georgia. They found they create their own businesses now in Georgia, and they try to occupy us like this way. And of course we have protests, and we are against of it. We are afraid, but we do not want to become like cowards. We are still brave people who wants to save its independence, and of course its freedom.
Just a question,
Slava
Laura.
Ukraini, and yes.
A last question before we conclude this interview. You said there are lots of Russians who came to Georgia recently because they are fleeing mobilization. There are probably lots of young men coming. I guess you have also refugees from Ukraine in your country. Can you say us a few words about refugees from Ukraine? Are there many of them? And do they somehow get along with the Russians and the Georgians? Do you see them? Are they visible, or are they're just a small part?
Yes, they are visible. The quantity of Ukrainian refugees, to my mind, it's the same as Russians, but Russians are not refugees. They try to avoid sanctions, economic sanctions, and try to create comfort zone in Georgia. But Ukrainians, yes, they are in Georgia. We try to help them. Also, government, our Ministry of Education opened special Ukrainian sectors for Ukrainian pupils. We try to give them jobs because they need income, salaries to survive, and also our government has a monthly payment for Ukrainians. So we try to show our support, but Georgia is not a very rich country. We are trying to do our maximum, but internationally, we are not, we did not join to international sanctions, so we are not as loyal as we should be regarding to Ukraine. So I'm really sorry for my government. And we show protest, but our ruling party is now controlling almost everything in Georgia. So we have same number, same quantity, Russians and Ukrainians now in Georgia. But Ukrainians speak to, it is very interesting. Russians began to speak in English because they know that Ukrainians know English, and it was easy to recognize, to differentiate Ukrainians and Russians. But now Russians, like chameleons, changed their attitude, and now they are also speaking to English language, and it's difficult for us to identify which are Ukrainians and which are Russians. Normally we are very angry, and we have very kind of critic attitude to Russians. That's why they did it.
Interesting. Laura Gotiashvili, thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
have a very good day. Thank you, Laura. And with that second message from the ground, I would pass the floor to my wonderful colleague, Sonia Schiffers, who will moderate now the panel. Sonia is our Tbilisi office director, She directs our, I think it's called South Caucasus office of the Böll Foundation. And I give you now the floor, dear Sonia.
Thank you very much, Giorgio, and good afternoon, everyone. As Giorgio already said, my name is Sonia Schiffers. I'm the director of our Tbilisi office, South Caucasus region, and I have the pleasure to moderate the remainder of this session. At HBS, and particularly with this panel, our idea is to stop West-splaining and to listen to experts and our partners from Eastern Europe better, to provide a platform for their analysis and their concerns about the security situation in Eastern Europe. And before we start our discussion with our guests, I would like to reiterate some of the concerns that have been mentioned previously by our speakers and also in the Menti poll. Besides obviously Russia's war in Ukraine, there is a general feeling of insecurity, or not just a feeling, there is physical insecurity and danger in the region. The destruction of homes and private property is a concern, but also of public institutions and public life. The economic consequences of the war are felt not only in Ukraine, but also in other countries of the region. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya also mentioned the impunity of dictators due to the lack of consistency encouraged by the West, the impossibility to appease tyrants who see deals as weakness, the fight for democracy and for the very existence of whole countries, the feeling of solidarity with Ukraine and the desire to express solidarity. And then lastly, the influx of Russians, the migration of Russians to neighboring countries, the socio-economic consequences, and also the societal, emotional consequences of that migration. Before we start analyzing these and other concerns, I would like to thank our speakers for their readiness to discuss Eastern European security with us and to invite them to the panel. We have Natalia Gumenyuk, a Ukrainian journalist specializing in conflict reporting and human rights, and the co-founder of the Public Interest Journalism Lab. Secondly, we have Denis Chenusha, a political analyst from Moldova and expert on security in Eastern Europe. And lastly, Tigran Grigoryan, a political analyst based in Yerevan and the head of the Regional Center for Democracy and Security. Let's start our conversation with Natalia Gumenyuk. A few days ago, Ukrainian President Zelensky said that the situation at the front is getting more and more difficult right now, and that he's expecting another Russian offensive. How is this discussed in Ukraine, and which scenarios do you see for the course of the war and for future Ukrainian security?
Hi, hello, I'm glad to join. I think that it's not just the but the others who discuss and who's very seriously treating the possible assault from the Russia, and it's really considered very seriously in Kiev. It's expected that the mobilization, which was, I should say, partially successful, if you speak about the Russia, because there was no major revolt, really would lead for the attack, in particular in the Donbas. And we can feel about more cases of the arrests, of the cases of the attacks, and also military casualties in the Donbas. However, of course, there are the concerns that there could be attacks also on the border region of Kharkiv, but also from the Belarus, in particularly on Kiev. However, the big difference is that at this time, Ukraine is well more defended, and there is no kind of major expectation of anything like overtaking Chernihiv or overtaking Kiev. It's really just, again, more like considered as a threat, and maybe a way of the strategy to just make Ukrainians troops very much stalled and not being able to really defend a lot of towns in the Donbas. But something which I want to add in terms of the security. Just to explain, I'm coming from the human rights background. I'm for 8 years for the reporting human rights abuses in Crimea and in the Donbass connected to the conflict. And for the last year, within the Reckoning Project, my organization we document war crimes and alleged crimes against humanity. When we're speaking about the dozens of thousands of them, which we may, to some extent reconfirm. I think it's very important today to see that from some people like me, from civil society leaders, from human rights activists, we really see that the Russian invasion and the occupation is still the major threat to the Ukrainian security and to the security as such. So if just to let me explain that, for instance, if we were for 7 years reporting about, repressions against Crimean Tatars in Crimea or activists or any any arrest and the detentions, it was quite clear. So there was really a security thinking by the Russian state in terms of this operation, because by the moment the war was there, they were not unable to report. The place was cleaned, and Crimea has become the military Platzdarm and the playground to attack the country. Also, in the areas where the Ukrainians are, where there is occupation, we really, for instance, giving you some of the very little statistic, but saying just in case of the local authorities, in the occupied areas, we had at least like 150 cases of the abduction of the local authorities. We are speaking about the mayors, heads of the villages, and numerous abduction, tortures. So any territory, I know that now while talking to the lawyers and legal experts, when we're speaking about the occupied Kherson, we're speaking about more or less a huge prison, the detention camp. So if any types of the Russian occupation prior to 2022 was still kind of debatable, we now see that it's really an absolute risk, and also in terms of the human security, a duty of the Ukrainians to free that. And the final remark would be why it's also important, because there is an international debate on, where could be the conflict stalled, where could be maybe possibly, that's something Ukrainians do not accept, but still, like something where there would be a frozen line in this conflict. So the clear idea is the further Russians are pushed, the lesser they can attack the Ukrainian towns. For instance, the successful operation and the liberation of Kherson region managed to defend Mykolaiv and Odessa because they are not shelled. So the further the Russians are, the further they are moved, the more secure is the rest of the country, and the lesser are the risk of the possible attacks. So that's why I really cannot separate those, and saying that so far, with what we see, with what we document, just absolute like the deterrence made by the military is really probably the most important things. And again, a slight short remark myself, which also for me a bit struggling to speak like that. Somebody coming from, again, I'm insisting and talking about that a lot of times, human rights background. But I've seen a lot of towns. I've been traveling the last year all around the country. I've seen for all these years a lot of places destroyed by the weapon, by the shelling, and get probably used to that. But I also saw the difference when there was a high precise weapon used by the Ukrainian army in Kherson and the regions later liberated. And I saw the difference. I saw the difference when there is a military headquarters destroyed and the civilians areas are actually spared from the death and destruction, and the difference of the different type of weapon used by the Russians, for instance, but also by a different, less precise weapon. So I think this discussion, again, what is called, it's not really called, the weapon, the support is not called with the idea of escalation or a kind of militarization of the society, but in particular, the liberation brings security back for the Ukrainian citizens. Occupation 100% means absolute insecurity. And as well, the more precise and quality weapon and opportunity actually save the lives of the people in any case. So that would be my initial call for this discussion.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for making this very important point that in the case of Ukraine, we cannot really separate national security from human security. I would like to continue with Dennis. according to our poll, Moldova is currently most threatened by Russian aggression. How is this discussed in Moldova? Is the perception similar? And what are the Moldovan authorities doing to mitigate that threat? Can they mitigate it?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting to this conversation, timely conversation, but I think until the war is not over, this will be a necessary conversation about what is going on in the region, particularly in Ukraine, but also in countries like Moldova, which are the collateral victims on the one hand, because we feel a lot of waves of shocks regarding the humanitarian crisis, due to the huge flow of refugees from Ukraine. Right now, we have about 100,000 people that are residing in Moldova. They receive support from the Moldovan authorities, local authorities, through international projects, and this is very important for Moldova to have this external assistance on this regard. But also Moldova is a target of direct actions of Russia in terms of weaponization of energy. And I think that this is one of the areas where we have to look closely what we can do in order to support the country, because there are ramifications of this insecurity in the energy field. And that is why the population right now is not so much thinking about an eventual attack of Russia, which according to more probable scenarios is not going to happen, because Ukraine is defending its territory. So Russia cannot create any land connection between the territories it controls or occupies in Ukraine and respectively Transnistrian region, from where they could attack Moldova eventually. We have other possibilities that Russia has in its hands in order to make Moldova feel insecurity. And one, as I mentioned, is energy. And this is regarding the vulnerability that Moldova has been having due to the dependence on gas from Russia, which is something that we continue to have, because Russia is not respecting the contracts that the Moldovan authorities have signed in 2021. And the fact that this contract is not respected is creating a lot of uncertainty. So Moldova has to ensure that it has additional alternative ways to import, to supply gas to Moldova, to ensure the security of supply. And on the other hand, something which is very complicated to really guarantee for Moldova is the security of the space. Ukraine is a showcase that Russia can literally hit any point on the map of Ukraine and make civilians suffer, make destruction for the critical infrastructure. Similar events can happen to Moldova, because Moldova doesn't have any sort of security for its air. We already had various episodes when Russian missiles have landed on the Moldovan territories without any casualty, thanks God. But still, this is a huge area where Moldova is simply unable to have any security, any guarantees. So this would be the let's say sources of insecurity that comes from Russia, which in a way keeps Moldova somehow guessing from where the next hit could come. And on top of that, something which Moldovan civil society is very much used to talk about for many years, but especially now, is the hybrid insecurities related to the security of the informational space. It is true that Moldova has been dealing with the Russian propaganda and disinformation for many years, and this is still the case. It is also true that the government has been taking measures to mitigate the problems coming in from this control of narratives, control of sources of information, and also the dependence and the habits of the Moldovan population to get informed from the Russian sources of information. Right now, we have more diversification of the sources of information, but still, this is something where both the EU, Germany, and other external partners could help the Moldovan mass media to get stronger, to improve the quality of their content, and make the population and actually buy in the population, because we still have the population that is supporting the idea that Ukraine is guilty for the war that Russia is waging against Ukraine, or we have a population that is equally evaluating or saying that Zelensky and Putin are responsible for the war in equal measure. This is not normal. I speak about polls which were conducted last year in November, and the situation is still unchanged. Here I will stop because I think that I have stolen too much time. But I try to depict the picture as comprehensive as possible for you. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have follow-up questions to all of you, but I think time is already short. So let's move to Tigran. And Armenia is in quite a unique place, I would say, in the region because of its complex relationship with Russia. So maybe you could explain to our German and international audience how Armenia has been affected by Russia's war in Ukraine, and also by the overall power shifts in the region, and how is Armenia dealing with it?
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad to be part of this panel. So yes, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has had significant negative effects on the processes going on in the Armenian-Azerbaijani context. After the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, a power vacuum was created, which was conditioned both by Russia's and the West preoccupation with the war in Ukraine. So Azerbaijan has been trying to instrumentalize this power vacuum in the region and to promote or to use its policy of coercive diplomacy. So since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, we've already had 3 major escalations in the region, 2 in Nagorno-Karabakh, and the biggest one was the Azerbaijani attack against Armenian sovereign territory, when actually parts of Armenian territory were occupied and there were lots of casualties. And the latest episode of this policy is, of course, the blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh that has been in place already for nearly 2 months. People have been stuck in Nagorno-Karabakh without access to food, to medicines, and so on. Of course, there are certain deliveries, but there is a significant deficit of supplies and medicines. So there are several reasons for these processes. The first one is Russia's decreasing capabilities in the region. Russia has been so preoccupied with the war in Ukraine that it has been failing to actually fulfill its role of the arbiter in the South Caucasus. So this void has been used by the authorities in Azerbaijan to escalate the situation. The second trend was and is Russia's growing dependence on Turkey and Azerbaijan in the process of mitigating the Western imposed sanctions, in the process of diversifying its foreign trading ties, and so on. So Azerbaijan has become a very important country for Russia. Just to give you a context, in the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, Russia and Azerbaijan have already signed 3 very important documents. The first one was actually signed 2 days before the invasion. It was called a declaration on allied cooperation. There was a document signed on the cooperation in the intelligence sphere, and the latest one was related to the development of the so-called North-South corridor, which allows Russia to actually connect its market to the Indian market through the territory of Azerbaijan and Iran. In parallel to these processes going on, there's a significant crisis of relations between Armenia and Russia. So Russia hasn't been able to even issue a single straightforward statement condemning the Azerbaijani aggression against Armenia in September, when all the major powers like the United States, the EU, France have been very vocal in their statement, and they have been very straightforward in their statements. Russia has been also failing to organize some sort of negotiations that could solve the situation in the Lachin corridor. So Russia is in charge of the Lachin corridor. Russia has obligations to provide security and safety along the corridor alongside with Azerbaijan. So Russia's inaction to actually fulfill its commitments has created this crisis in the relationship. As you know, the Armenian government refused to sign the final declaration of the CSTO summit, which took place in Yerevan several months ago. Armenia also refused to deploy the CSTO monitoring mission to Armenia, which was in a pipeline since September. Instead, Armenia worked actively to actually involve the EU, and the decision was made to send an EU monitoring mission to Armenia. And here we come to the third major trend that we've been witnessing after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It is an attempt by the authoritarian states in the region to neutralize or to minimize the Western presence and Western influence in the South Caucasus. To give you an example, both Russia and Azerbaijan have been vehemently opposing the deployment of the EU monitoring missions for different reasons, but the fact is still there that they both oppose this mission. The second example is the attempt by Russia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Iran to create this format, which they call 3+3 or 3+2, which is a sheer attempt to actually minimize any kind of Western influence in the South Caucasus. So overall, this is the situation, and Armenia is actually facing existential challenges. I was actually surprised to see that so few people voted for Armenia in the first poll, because I believe Armenia, from the countries of the Eastern neighborhood, apart from Ukraine, Armenia has been the country that has been so far affected in the most negative way. We've already had several escalations, and there is the threat of another war looming, because Azerbaijan is using this coercive diplomacy, these tactics of coercive diplomacy to actually extort concessions from Armenia in the negotiation process.
Thank you, Tigran. We are running out of time as always, but before I hand over to Giorgio for another poll, I would like to ask the three of you very quickly if you could just name one or two demands that are voiced in your countries now towards Germany and the European Union, the most central demands that you would have, or that are dominant in Ukraine, Moldova, and Armenia. Let's start with Natalia, and really let's keep it at 20 seconds each.
I think there won't be the list. I think for the Ukrainians, most important to understand that there shouldn't be discussion whether there should be any deal or something, that there should be a very clear victory. And of course, if you speak the accountability and responsibility, so the impunity won't be tolerated, as in this time there would be impunity for the Russians for what they did. That would, everything we discussed would go on. So for instance, these things as a trial of a special tribunal on the aggression, they are critical, and things like that. So, a clear understanding of the need of the Ukrainian victory and all support needed for it. It's the only and the most important demand.
Okay, thank you very much. Dennis?
Well, I think that we need three very important aspects to take in consideration. One is reforms with aid attached to them and conditionality. I think that that's important. We forget to talk about conditionality, but they are helpful. Secondly, we need technical assistance for energy and defense resilience, and Germany is trying to help with defense on bilateral level as well, not only as part of the EU. And third, but not least, is the Europeanization. We need to make sure that Moldova, as well as Ukraine, but hopefully with Georgia in the same package, if it's possible, to be helped to progress with the Europeanization.
Thank you. And Tigran?
Yeah, I think the most immediate demand at the moment is related to the Lachin corridor crisis. As I've already said, Nagorno-Karabakh has been in blockade for 2 months, and people in Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh expect more from the European Union, from Germany, and from all the other major powers within the EU. The second, not demand, but expectation would be to have a more active role for the EU in the negotiation process. to change this facilitation approach towards more mediation, to have their own proposals, because, for example, Russia has its own proposals, but the EU and the US don't have their own proposals. So to have more content in terms of negotiations. And the third one is to, of course, to have a more moral foreign policy in the South Caucasus. Here, I would absolutely support the statement made by Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya that you cannot pacify dictators. And what has been happening recently in the South Caucasus is an attempt to pacify a prominent dictator.
Thank you. I think that gave us a lot of input to discuss with Viola von Kramon. But first, I would like to hand over to Giorgio for another poll.
Ich wollte erstmal alle Teilnehmer nochmal darauf aufmerksam machen, dass sie die Möglichkeit haben, Fragen.
First of all, I wanted to inform all our participants once again that you have the opportunity to ask questions yourself. You've got this Q&A tool that we are going to use in our last round. But if you don't have a question, we do have questions. So we do have a question to you, first of all. So take your smartphones once again, and we will use Menti once again. Again, scan this code or dial menti.com and then use the code 1537146 or use the URL. We have another question to you. At the beginning, we asked the question, besides Ukraine, which East European country is most threatened? Tigran Grigoryan was somehow disappointed that in the first round, Armenia didn't seem to be threatened. At least most people thought that Armenia was safe. And I see now that Tigran's intervention was useful. Armenia is nearly topping the list and is nearly seen as being nearly as threatened as Moldova. And the most safe region now seems to be the Baltic states. They are NATO members. So very interesting to see that difference between our first opinion poll and the second one in the first round. Armenia just got one vote. So everybody thought that the country was doing fine, and Tigran opened our eyes to the real situation. Let me now come to the second question, if possible. And that question looks at the overall situation in Eastern Europe. What is your opinion? How do you think security in Eastern Europe is going to develop? Will the security situation remain the same? Is it going to be more stable or more unstable? Or could the situation get out of control altogether? And here we seem to have a very consistent majority of people who say we do have a situation in Eastern Europe that has the potential to get more unstable. Only a few people say that it could stay on the same level or could stabilize. But there are also very few people who really think that the situation could get out of control. So a very clear-cut opinion of our participants. And I would like to move on to the next and last question. And that has something to do with the German role we'd like to discuss with Viola von Kramon. Where do you wish for a stronger German engagement in the region? Which are the areas that Germany should be more active in? Is it humanitarian or military support, economic assistance, or political assistance and support in the framework, say, for instance, of EU accession processes? And here, we seem to have a very clear-cut trend. Political support probably that includes EU accession is considered most important, and then the second demand would be for more military assistance. thirdly, more economic assistance. Now, these are the figures we are going to present Viola von Kramon with. I would like to thank you for participating in the poll. I move over to my colleague again, and we are going to switch to English again.
Thank you very much. Viola, our panelists have expressed certain expectations towards Germany and the European Union, among them a clear focus on Ukrainian victory, and more broadly speaking, no deals with autocrats, stronger political involvement of Germany and the EU. This was also expressed in the Menti poll, and strong support, but also democratic conditionality. What do you think? How can Germany and the EU in this very difficult security situation contribute to stability in the region and fight back the Russian aggression?
Well, thank you so much, Sonia, for having me. Thanks to the Böll Foundation for inviting this great panel, which is absolutely timely. And I think also the introduction remarks from Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, where she said, without a democratic Belarus, there will be no peace in Ukraine. And I would continue to say, without peace and stability in Ukraine, there will be no peace in the European Union. And whether this is already completely internalized, maybe in a more technical way, by everyone in the current German traffic light government, I'm not so sure. And that is, at the moment, at least, our main obstacle. So looking to the situation and to the political will here in the European Parliament, I would at least emphasize that we are always at the forefront of the supporters of Ukraine, but also of those who ask for definitely more military aid. We have seen the political assistance. I mean, broad majority here in the European Parliament had come up with a request for candidate status for Ukraine. But also, what I was missing in the survey was the question of the jurisdictory support. So we have asked for an ad hoc tribunal. And of course, I mean, the question of military support will be crucial for the survival and for the existence of Ukraine. And we all here in the parliament, cross-party wise, regretted the long wait and the reluctance, especially of the Chancellor, to come up with a decision whether Germany will give other countries the permission, but also will itself deliver armory, weapons, modern technology from Germany, especially the Leopard 1 and 2. So now we have heard a couple of days ago that Scholz said, okay, if the US will be ready to send this category of weapons, so to say, we are ready to join them. I think this is a kind of in German we say Misstrauensantrag, so it's a kind of a signal for mistrust against the alliance and against the partners here in the European Union, but also in a broader sense against the partners in NATO. Well, of course, in case there would be any attack on one of the partners, on one country, there would be the Article, I think, 5 or 6, which secures, of course, the safety and the security of each partner. So for us in the European Union, we were rather, how to say, ashamed by the, let's say, the very slow process. You can call it democratic, as some of my colleagues in the Bundestag and in Germany had called it. That's fine, but it is about each and every soldier and civilian in Ukraine who had to die before this decision. And I think that most of us were not really ready for a big war. But now, after almost 12 months, had had taken this had not taken place is not the right decision. The Ukraine had suffered under this brutal attack. I think it was absolutely clear that we had to put everything on stake to make sure that Ukraine will be successful. And also when it comes, and we saw the response to your survey, the second question was the military support. Germany came up with a so-called Zeitenwende, saying or stating that we would be ready to spend an additional and extra budget on military for 100 billion, but spread out of, I think, 5 years. But now we actually see, and the new minister for defense had said this is not enough, considering what was cut off for the last years. So I think there will be an extra budget on this extra budget to make sure that not just we equip our Bundeswehr, our own military, but also make sure that we can deliver enough and can fulfill all the NATO requirements within the next month and years to come. And on the other hand, one point should be important. We see this huge influence coming from Russia in terms of media, propaganda, disinfo, and so on. And that is a continuous and very systematic, but also very smart of influencing our societies. I think one of the main targets is, of course, Germany. And you can easily see how smart Russian narratives fly around, how they circulate in closed WhatsApp groups and Telegrams groups and so on, but also through certain, I would say, picked up narratives from the Kremlin by ordinary media, by ordinary journalists. It is, I think, for a long time, it was common to say it's the Ukraine conflict and not the Russian war on Ukraine. And so the terminology is very much driven by a Russian narrative. And you see how sometimes now, for example, Anna-Lena, when she responded in the Council of Europe, in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, with an absolutely normal response to the question of what do we need to do to support Ukraine? And each and every one of us here in the European Parliament would say the same. Yes, of course, we are in a war with Russia because Russia attacks us every day on a hybrid level, military, and provokes us. So this is a kind of war, and we need to realize that. But this is being picked up, selectively taken apart by Russian disinfo, by Russian media, and then said, wow, the foreign minister of Germany had declared war against Russia. This is how they try to destabilize our political figures, leadership, societies, and so on. And so that is a very, I don't think it's a huge danger, but this is something we need to become much more resilient. We have to build up better strategies. We have to also find ways how to counterbalance this kind of narratives. And I would say this is something we deal here in the European Parliament, excuse me, much more systematic for the last month. One more thing on the German perspective, of course, and this is also not new. The German past overshadows the way how we handle, let's say, the Ukrainian war. Unfortunately, still a huge percentage of people have or mix the situation in Russia with the Soviet Union. So many forgot to remind that or remember that the majority of victims during the Second World War happened actually on the territory of Ukraine, of Belarus, of course, the Baltic states and Poland. Yes, there were also many Russian dead soldiers and civilians, but compared to the situation, especially in Ukraine and Belarus, that was much less. And so if we have, and we do have, a historic responsibility and even guilt, then we need to consider that we have to support Ukraine with all the means we have as much as possible. And this is, I think, sometimes still forgotten in the, let's say, German intellectual circles.
Thank you, Viola. We don't have much time left, but I would like to add one more question. And then there is also a very interesting question posed by one of our guests. First, in 2008, when Ukraine and Georgia didn't get a NATO membership action plan because of German and French resistance, there was the belief, even from some US advisors, although the US was in favor of the membership action plans, that granting maps would result in further instability and maybe in Russian attacks on Crimea or eastern Ukraine. Unfortunately, what we have seen is that although no membership action plan was given, Russia attacked Ukraine, and Ukraine was on its own. So do you think there is any movement on the question of NATO membership for Ukraine, Georgia, maybe potentially other countries in the region, given that we have seen that these countries are not safe without alliances? And maybe just to add another question from the audience, there is the question of how you see the EU balancing a value-based policy with an interest-based policy, for example, in the case of buying gas from Azerbaijan. And I think this question can be asked more broadly. How can we get to a more coherent value-based foreign policy?
Well, this is a real dilemma at the moment. Let me start with the second one. I mean, with our AFET committee, we traveled to the 3 South Caucasus countries in summer last year. And it was almost, how to say, it was really regretful to see how self-empowering, especially the representatives of Azerbaijan approached us, because they knew, because of the lack of gas and because of the boycott and the cut off of Russian gas and so on, the European Union, but especially Germany, was extremely keen to intensify the trade relations with Azerbaijan. So in that respect, it is quite a dilemma at the moment. On the short term, I would just hope that at least the rhetorics and the expression when it comes to communicating on Twitter, it wouldn't be that much praising, to be honest. I think behind closed door that also Ursula von der Leyen and other representatives from the European Union, but also from the member states level, could be really honest and talk tougher than they did last summer, for example, when the new trade agreement was agreed. I mean, you can't call Mr. Aliyev at the moment a trustworthy partner, knowing what he does domestically, how much he's torturing political prisoners, and how much he repress all kinds of opposition, independent media, and so on and so forth. So it is a very desperate and a very blunt situation in Azerbaijan, and it's true that has only little to do with value-based foreign policy. I have to admit, others would maybe interpret that in a different way, but being in a close exchange with many journalists and activists, I have to admit that is a real dilemma. The first question was, sorry, once again?
About NATO membership.
Yes. Well, I think that at that moment in 2008, even the majority in Ukraine was against a NATO membership perspective. And that made it so easy or easily for Chancellor Merkel, but also for Sarkozy at that moment to say, wait a minute, if not the majority of the population, and there was always this portrayed picture of a split Ukraine about that. And what really matters was the interest of Russia, and we should not look to that. And I could imagine if at that moment we had taken a more courageous decision in favor of a perspective, maybe not an immediate, but the perspective of a NATO membership, maybe this war had never taken place. So it was absolutely clear. There was no map for neither for Georgia nor for Ukraine. And the next move, the next step from Putin's side was first to attack Georgia and then 6 years later to attack Ukraine. And I remember I had a meeting with the foreign minister of Georgia in summer 2011 and 2012. He was so upset. He did not really want to talk with me in a serious manner, because he took a collective guilt for all the Germans. And to be honest, I think he was right in taking us into, how to say, into responsibility for the wrong decision.
Thank you. Let's get back to our panel for 5 more minutes. So Dennis, Natalia, and Tigran, I would like to ask you a couple more questions about relations with the European Union. And let's start with Natalia, who I think is called Dennis now in our, now she was renamed, great. Natalia, Ukraine received EU candidate country status last year, and according to the European Commission's report on the preparedness of Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia to join the EU, which was released a couple of days ago, Ukraine is the front runner. Nevertheless, it is actually an unimaginable task to implement all these reforms during the war. So how do you perceive this challenge? Is there space to do difficult reforms despite the war? And what can the EU, what can Germany do to support this process as well, in addition to the military support?
So first of all, I think it's important to refer to the last week's summit, which taken place in Kiev. It was absolutely, more than symbolic, and it was critically important, and the reviews were positive. It was positively welcomed. So I think there is a movement and there is a progress. In terms of the reforms, again, as somebody who was for a few years, for all the years, I guess, the Ukrainian civil society was really speaking strongly about the conditionality of the Western support to Ukraine in return of the reforms, of the anti-corruption reforms. That should be still there. It's also partially the not the demand, but the understanding of a lot of people in Ukraine that it's matters. There should be conditions. However, at the same time, it really should be treated a bit differently, because we know that the Ukrainian economy basically doesn't really work properly. It's partially funded by the funds from the European Union, from the allies, the salaries of the civil servants, the pensions, and without the money, it's critically difficult to really perform any reforms, because what we also understand, the reforms also, the people should feel that. So I think that indeed, we cannot really treat the Ukraine's accession to the EU as normal, as if it's normal things. So it should be case by case. The reconstruction should be there. Probably the we cannot speak just about the reforms. It should be about the reconstruction. We know about some challenges about the transparency in terms of in the sphere of the security. We understand that there can be that transparency. So I think it's probably more challenging. It's more challenging for the Ukrainians, of course, but also there should be more intellectual job and intellectual task to understand how you can combine, because I do think that I have quite a lot of people in Ukraine thinking that a lot of things should be not just reformed, but built from the scratch. and it's a good opportunity to build it. You know, when we speak about the green economy, when, for instance, we're speaking about the energy diversification, you know, you see, you know, so for instance, giving you this slight example, if you really need to change Ukrainian dependency of the oil and of the gas, probably something else should be done. It should be done with a major investment with the rules, and that could be something for the other spheres as well.
Thank you so much. Dennis, let's talk about EU integration in Moldova as well. You've already mentioned that aid and conditionality is important, and Moldova has received 9 recommendations last year. To what extent, but at the same time, in this report that came out last week, oh, Dennis is gone. Can you hear me? No.
I think we lost him.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you have a question for Tigran.
Sure. Yeah, Tigran, you've already mentioned that the EU has become more active in Armenia, and I think this is something that we all appreciate. Except probably some of the EU's rivals, so to say, in the region, and Moscow has been very critical of the EU's increasing involvement. Are there any voices in Armenia who fear some kind of competition between the EU and Russia, or is this an unnecessary fear, so to say, and every support is welcome in Armenia?
Well, the language that was used by the foreign ministry, as you know, I think a week ago, the Russian foreign ministry issued a press release where it said that, you know, the involvement of extra-regional actors in the region is not welcome and so on, and they basically threatened both the EU and Armenia with unintended consequences of this decision to send the monitoring mission. So, of course, lots of people are worried about these statements coming from Moscow. Lots of people are worried that Moscow and Baku can actually work together to show the ineffectiveness of the EU monitoring mission in Armenia. That's why it's very important, in my understanding, both for the Armenian government and for the monitoring mission to actually work actively with all the stakeholders on the ground to avoid any kind of confrontation in Armenia, because Armenia is in no situation to get involved in any kind of Russia-West conversation on its soil. But overall, it is, of course, a welcome development that this mission has been deployed. I think it would be very hard to imagine the deployment of such kind of mission before the war in Ukraine. And as we've seen, the war created not just challenges for Armenia, but also openings. So this is an opportunity to diversify its security architecture, to involve more players, to create new balance of power on the ground. And this process should be promoted furthermore. And Armenia has been trying to do that, to diversify its foreign policy relations, to have greater engagement with their Western counterparts, with the EU, with the US. And I believe this monitoring mission could play a vital role in decreasing the instability on the ground.
Thank you. And maybe one more question to you, Tigran, from our audience. There's a question about why there is so little interest in Armenia in Germany. I don't know if you can answer that question, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think traditionally the EU has been, the EU meaning has been passive in terms of the conflict, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, because France was the representative, the informal representative of this structure in the negotiation process. France was the co-chair of the OSCE Minsk group, and it was supposed to represent the EU and all the major powers in the EU as well. But after the end of the Second Karabakh War, when both Russia and Azerbaijan has been trying to torpedo the Minsk group process, as we've seen, a new opening has been created for the EU. But Germany, yes, has been very passive politically in terms of trying to play a greater negotiating role. But in terms of economic engagement, I think we've seen positive developments in recent months. There have been several very important visits. I know that there are plans to get more engaged in terms of economically in Armenia, so that's a positive development. And I believe, of course, Armenia should also work more actively or proactively in the European direction, both with the European Union and with all the major stakeholders in the EU, to create this interest in the region, because I understand that there are certain pragmatic interests related to Azerbaijan, but I believe these interests are overhyped at times, because when we are talking about Azerbaijan's ability or capability, you know, to substitute the Russian gas, I mean, the agreement that was signed last summer, it's more of a, I was joking the other day that it's more of a toast than an agreement, because there are no such capabilities. So there should be more engagement from both sides. And of course, in Armenia, we only welcome both Germany's, the EU's and the US active involvement in the processes in the South Caucasus.
Thank you, Tigran. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. And I've been thinking about whom to address this question to, because it's about Poland and the EU, but then we still have Viola von Kramon here, I believe, and maybe she could answer that question. So the question is about the changing perception of Poland in the European Union due to Poland's strong support for Ukraine. I also have the impression that before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there was criticism of domestic developments in Poland, and the human rights violations was louder. So how has Russia's war in Ukraine affected the position of Poland within the European Union, and shouldn't we keep up the criticism and on the basis of human rights? How do you see this dilemma?
Well, thank you. That's a crucial question, also for how serious we take the values, the European values here in the European Union. On one hand, security, you have named it, that the job Poland does in terms of taking care of Ukrainian refugees, providing and delivering arms and also humanitarian goods, everything else to Ukraine is really of great importance, and they do a good job. But everything which is linked directly or indirectly to the European Union, Poland is nevertheless extremely cautious, and sometimes it's almost bizarre when something comes from Brussels, even they think this could be a good idea, they wouldn't join this because it has a European flag on this. And honestly, if we are in a war and we need to stick together, we really have to overcome this kind of really ridiculous attitude. I was also speaking to many of my peace colleagues here, and I think, come on, guys, we are really on the same page. We really have to put our efforts together. And please make sure you're not attacking us because it's a European initiative. It's sometimes it's absolutely not necessary. So yes, on one hand, we wish we could also rhetorically in terms of communicating, aligning more with Poland, but they don't make our life easier, honestly. And of course, on all the domestic issues and all the domestic things, they have come a bit closer. They had understood that they can't reject the money different from Hungary. They don't play this power game until the very end, that's for sure. And I could imagine that things are slightly changing, by far not what we expected and what was requested in the judiciary sector and many more issues, but they are a bit more cooperative than the political situation in Hungary, also because of the NGO, civil society, and the opposition asked for that. But when it comes to Ukraine, I would say they could play an even bigger role if they would use their power in a more, let's say, consolidated and cooperative way to push the other partners in the EU and also in the NATO alliance. But yes, for supporting Ukraine, they are crucial and they do definitely a good job.
Thank you, Viola. So if this war has shown us two things, then it's the importance of alliances between democracies and countries that care about human rights, but also the importance about of European unity. And unfortunately, these two are not always in sync, but hopefully we are getting better. And with this, I would like to thank you all for taking part in our panel and hand over to Giorgio for a quick wrap-up of the session.
Und die abschließenden Worte sind in Deutsch.
And the closing words will be in German. First of all, allow me to thank all participants. That was our kickoff events of our 23rd Foreign Policy meeting. Before I say goodbye to you, there are two things I would like to bring to your attention. First of all, in the chat, you would see a very quick opinion poll where you can give us your feedback. What did you like about this event? What didn't you like? We need your feedback because we're going to continue tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. We are going to meet online once again at the same time. And on Friday, we are going to have a final event, a closing event, face-to-face meeting and online in our foundation. Today we started in Eastern Europe. Tomorrow we are going to have two analysts from the United States and some Europeans, so it will be a kind of transatlantic event. And on Wednesday we are going to have a global meeting with representatives from the Global South and United Nations. And we are going to refer to the war in Eastern Europe time and again over the next couple of days. I would like to say thanks to all of you. Thanks to have stayed with us until the end. Thanks to my team for being with me. And if you want to turn on your cameras, you may do so. Otherwise, I'm going to just mention the name. It's Milena Grunewald from our Foreign Policy Desk, sitting opposite me. To my left, there's Corinna Fischer from our Global Diplomacy Lab, our cooperation partner. We have Daria Birimachuk from the Ukraine, our intern, and Caro Bertram, our project manager. Let me wish you all a nice afternoon and see you tomorrow, I hope. Same time, same place. We are going to have a transatlantic discussion. So have a good time and see you tomorrow.